What's up, COD fans? Welcome back to Fantasy Now. Going into CDL Los Angeles, you're probably wondering at the last second, do I need to pick up anybody? Should I drop anybody? Who should I start? Who should I sit? We'll answer all those questions for you guys coming in. Now, I will say that this is going to be a weird weekend. A lot of substitutions for not only the Los Angeles Guerrillas, but we're also anticipating the one coming out for Seattle and for New York. So it's going to be interesting. And the question mark on a lot of people's minds is, should I pick up any of these substitutes maybe to give them a go? Personally, I would probably stay away from that, mostly due to the fact that I don't like the chances of teams like LAG or New York or Seattle getting into the actual playoff bracket, the 4-team playoff bracket. So I would be a little cautious about picking any of those players up. None of them are currently on my pickup list going into it. So definitely be cautious as far as should you pick any of those new players up. That being said, though, also make sure that as you're looking at your roster that you're playing players that are actually going to be playing this upcoming weekend. That's, of course, what you want. You don't want to be starting people that are not playing. So definitely keep that in mind as you go forward. Let's take a look back, though, at Atlanta and who our top performers were from that weekend in specific. Again, we mentioned it at the end of the London homestand. It was a lot of ARs are finding a lot of value right now in the DraftBuff fantasy leagues. So that hasn't changed much. But up top, it's actually two flex players, GodRx and Celium. They both inch over the 80-point threshold, which is something pretty special. We don't see that too often. That's an incredible number. Simp is just below them. So for flexes and SMGs, those guys had an incredible weekend. And of course, you want to make sure you're always keeping them on your roster. Do not trade these guys. Start them. Never sit them unless they're not playing. Always, always, always. Dens is still, again, performing at the top of the lists when it comes to fantasy numbers. You also got Methods, who had a great weekend for Toronto, even though they didn't have the best of weekends as a whole. Him as an AR is still finding a lot of value. Abizi, I know I said in my London video that I thought he was just going to be playing the OBJ. He wouldn't be getting a lot of kills. I was completely wrong on that one, so shame on me. He was able to find another 71-plus points. Waskin still usually sitting here in the top 10. Arcides, Assault, and Alex rounding out. And you take a look, a lot of Minnesota players and ATL players. Only one Chicago player. Interesting thinking face. Let's go over to our stardom or situm for this week, though. This is where things will get really interesting because, again, you've got some weird pools coming forward. As a reminder, your teams that are playing this weekend are Atlanta, Dallas, Florida, Los Angeles, both teams, Minnesota, New York, and Seattle. So you don't want to be starting any players from Chicago, London, Paris, or Toronto. Actually, while we have a second, let's go ahead and pull up our active and inactive going into this week. In Group A, it's Minnesota playing up against Seattle, and then both LA teams playing up against each other, which should provide a very interesting dynamic since the Los Angeles Guerrillas is going to look more like a pickup team versus a full 5-man of Optic Gaming. But Optic Gaming has looked pretty bad over the last couple of weeks. In Group B, Atlanta FaZe, Florida, they play each other for a rematch of the finals from ATL, and then Dallas and New York play each other, where again, we anticipate that there will be a roster sub out as Zero is not playing. Is it Happy? Is it Mac Melts? I don't know if it's fully been confirmed at the time of me making this video of who's going to be playing, but New York will be playing with the sub in as well. And then, of course, inactive, like I mentioned, Chicago, London, Paris, and Toronto. So with that in mind, let's go to the stardom or situm for this week. Starting with Slasher from Optic Gaming LA. Keep in mind that OGLA will be playing up against the Los Angeles Guerrillas first, where they'll either meet the winner of Minnesota-Seattle or they'll fall to the losers bracket and face the loser of those two. Particularly, I like Optic Gaming LA as chances at least to extend the series versus LAG, but you got to keep in mind that Optic Gaming LA is also making a role swap happen. Slasher's going to be using an AR and Dash is going to be using an SMG. Does that favor Slasher, who currently is running a .88 KD with 25 points in hardpoint already, which is actually pretty good? With an AR, you figure that his numbers should go up, but I still don't like the fact that this is still a team. I hate to say it so negatively, but I'm sitting Slasher this week. You just don't know enough about if he's going to actually pop off with the AR, or is he going to be more like what we saw from Mox last weekend, which is, I've got an AR, but I'm going to go run and contest close quarters action. You don't want to see that. So I'm a little apprehensive on Slasher. I think that if you own him and you don't have another choice, Starting him will give you a little bit more favor than what he's previously been generating points-wise because he is going to be picking up an AR, but still, I don't think he's worth the risk. I think there are better players out there. I'm giving him a sit to start things off. Hugh from Dallas, 89.25% of you guys own him, and he's only putting up 67 points per week. He's still rocking a positive KD, and his hardpoint numbers have been great. It's the search and the Dom that have been suffering a touch, most specifically the Dom. So the question becomes, do you start Hugh this week, going into a weekend where they play New York first, and then they play either Atlanta or Florida? Likely they'll play one of the two of them at least once, if not potentially twice, depending on how that second match goes, figuring that they beat New York. Personally, I think you start Hugh. He's running an SMG. He's finding a lot of OBJ time, but more importantly, I think this Dallas team has just gotten flat out better. Yeah, they have to play up against possibly Atlanta and then likely against a Florida team that looked pretty strong in Atlanta. But I still think that this Dallas team is better than that Florida team. Not better than the Atlanta team, but I still think they can put up a fight. So I think Hugh will actually find some favor. You're definitely going to want to start him. Keeping with that same sentiment, though, you've got Temp up next from New York. Again, another SMG player that 86% of you guys own, and he's averaging underneath the 60-point threshold. So with a .95 KD, do you start him? Again, his hardpoint total's not terrible, but his search numbers are actually doing much better than most other players on his team, and his domination numbers are okay. So going into this weekend, do you start or sit Temp this week? Personally, I think you sit him, mostly because I feel like he's going to be mostly the OBJ player now that they're adding in a substitute, and I feel like one of two things will happen. If it's Mac, that's the sub spot. Again, I'm not 100% sure at the time of this recording. If it's Mac, they're going to say, Mac, go kill stuff. Don't worry about the hill. Don't worry about the flags. We'll take care of all of that for you. You just go kill stuff. And I think Temp will be the guy to sit on the OBJ. Other side of it, if it's Happy that's playing, Temp is going to be the guy to play the Vanguard and be the guy to open things up while Happy soaks up things like hill time and capture percentage. And I think in both situations, Temp doesn't find the value that you want. Either he's going in first and dying if he's playing for Happy, or he's just sitting on OBJs and hopefully finding a couple of kills. I don't like the chances. I'm sitting him this week. Florida, Mox, we talked about him. AR player that is now starting to use a lot more SMG and double AR setups with Skies. Do you like him at 57 points per week? 84% of you guys out there own him. He's still holding a positive KD, and here's the thing about Florida. I personally like Mox and Skies together. Now, there have been some rumors floating that potentially Pharaoh will be jumping into the Florida roster this week, so keep your eye on that going up to start time. But personally speaking, 28 points for hardpoint is great. He's still running an AR for S&D, so his numbers are staying consistently above the 13-point threshold. And then in domination, they're still kind of figuring it out, but what we saw from him last week was better than what we saw from weeks previous. So personally speaking, you start Mox going into this next week, even though they have to play up against Atlanta again, and then they'll likely have to play Dallas. I still think Mox will do okay, and I think you start him just generally speaking because he is an AR, and ARs are consistently giving you more points in this fantasy league. Karma's up next for Seattle. Again, you got to keep in mind that Pander's the player that's joining in instead of Enable going into that Seattle squad. 73% of you guys own Karma. He's only putting up 62.26 points so far, but here's the bigger storyline. That's one of the better ones on the squad. So do you start Karma going into, again, a very tough bracket where they play Minnesota first? I think you absolutely should. He's definitely looking like a player that can do it all, and if he has a pop-off moment, that number of 62 could go up to 80 very, very quickly. It just comes down to, will the rest of Seattle play well this week? Because if not, well, let's be candid, Karma might not have the best of weekends. Sticking with New York, you got Zuma up here next. SMG player, 66% of you guys own him. He's only putting up 52 points per week, which is not bad, but it's not great. He's also really suffering in the search and destroy game, and that's what I'm most worried about when it comes to this New York team against their pool that they're playing up against. You've got three very good search and destroy teams in this pool. So do you like the chances of Zuma getting better there? I don't think you do. You're riding on the laurels of will he do better in hardpoint and Dom to get you your points. And personally speaking, based on what we've seen so far, I'm sitting Zuma this week. Again, we just don't know enough about this New York team for me to think that Zuma's going to have a great weekend. So I'm going to be putting him on the sit list. Coming to Clayster next for Dallas. AR player, 87% of you guys own him. He's putting up good numbers, 70 points per week. But why am I concerned potentially about Clayster? The domination is where I'm concerned about. He's only putting up 17 points, which is not bad, not good. And for that specifically, Dallas is in a tough domination pool. They've got New York, who's beaten Atlanta at Dom. They've got Florida, who went very positively in Dom last weekend. And they've got Atlanta, who's Atlanta. So for Clayster, are you worried about the domination standpoints? And will he get enough participation in hardpoint and search and destroy to make starting him worth it? I think yes. Generally speaking, because he is an AR player for a strong team that has good SMGs in front of you, plus another good AR in case you do play maps like Azir Cave, I think Clayster, you absolutely should be starting him. Again, a couple of concerning moments, though, because they really don't know how they want to really use Clayster and Dom yet. Is he going to be running in the AR? Is he going to pick up an SMG every now and again? It's really kind of hard to say. But so far, I think with Dallas having a couple of weeks where they can really rehearse themselves, get ready to go for this weekend, I feel good about Dallas. I feel good about Clay. Definitely start him. Going over next to our waiver wire. Again, this is a player that has been sitting on the free agency for a lot of people, and I'm not 100% sure why. And I think if you're looking for a pickup this weekend, this is a guy that you absolutely should be taking a look at. So getting into it from the Florida Mutineers, you see him on your screen. It's going to be Skies, my waiver wire pickup of the week. Of course, playing for Florida, flex role player. 57% of people own him, which is not enough. Here's the deal. He's averaging 69 points per week. That number's only going to go up, I personally feel. Watching him play last week against Atlanta, he still played extremely well. I think he's going to do the same thing here against Atlanta in the opening, and then again versus a team like Dallas or New York, depending on who they play next. His KD's 1.17. He's got great numbers in hardpoint. His numbers in search are going up. And domination, now that Florida has figured it out, Skies is actually top fragging in a lot of those games as a stationary AR. So you like what you're seeing out of this Florida squad if they can keep doing these kind of things. For Skies, I think it's nothing but green pastures in front of him. You definitely want to be picking him up. That's going to do it this week for the DraftBuff Fantasy Now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think below. Who are you starting? You want some opinions? I'll give them to you. Beyond that, though, I'll be giving a prediction video and a format breakdown coming up next. Don't go too far. Hopefully we'll see you guys for the next one. Until then, keep holding it down. Later. Bye-bye.